If you listen closely to the quietest corners of Hollywood history, beneath the applause, beneath the brass bands and the roaring fanfare, you can hear a very specific, terrifying sound. It is the sound of a calendar page turning. For a woman living in the winter of 1949, that sound was louder than a cannon shot. Imagine standing in front of a mirror tonight. The house is quiet. The lights are low. You look at your reflection and you take inventory, not of dreams, but of damage. You are 39 years old, in the world of factories, classrooms, or offices. 39 is the prime of life. You are seasoned. You are capable. You are just beginning to understand your own strength. But in Hollywood, 39 is not an age. It is a diagnosis. It is the beginning of the end. The phone that once rang with offers now sits untouched, gathering dust. The roles shift, first from heroine to side character, to mother, and then, quietly, to nothing at all. Lucille Ball was standing exactly there. She wasn't a failure. If she had failed, it might have been easier. Failure is clean. You can grieve it and move on. Lucille was trapped in something far more painful. She was adequate, the queen of the B-movies, the reliable backup plan, the actress you called when the real star was unavailable. She had spent 2 decades bleeding for the craft, dancing until her feet blistered, memorizing lines until they followed her into sleep, only to find herself holding a career that felt like a handful of dry sand. And yet, what she could not see, what no one in that quiet house could see, was this. In exactly 2 years, the entire American nation would stop breathing on Monday nights, just to watch her. She didn't know that yet. All she felt was the slow, quiet erosion of belief, the panic of a late hour settling into her chest. But here is the truth the calendar will never tell you. The problem wasn't that Lucille Ball was finished. The problem was that the world she was trying so desperately to fit into was simply too small for the woman she was becoming. To truly understand the miracle of her later years, we have to sit for a moment in the long, exhausting winter of her youth. We like to think of icons as people who burst onto the scene fully formed. We are told that genius is a lightning strike, sudden, violent, and undeniable. But that is a lie. Lucille was not a lightning strike. She was a slow burn in a damp, cold room. Go back to 1926. A 15-year-old girl steps off a train in New York City. The wind on 8th Avenue cuts through her thin coat like a knife. She is shivering, not just from the cold, but from the terrifying size of the city. She has come to chase a dream that does not want to be caught. She enrolls in drama school, sitting in the shadows of classmates who seem to shine brighter, speak louder, and move with a confidence she cannot fake. A few weeks later, the head instructor writes a letter to her mother. He doesn't say she is untalented. He says something far worse. He writes, "Lucy is wasting her time and mine. She is too shy and reticent to put her best foot forward." Think about the weight of those words. The woman who would one day make the entire world laugh until their ribs ached. The woman who would command empires was told she was too shy to be seen. She went home defeated. She retreated. But, and this is the first secret of the late bloomer, she didn't stay home. She returned. She went west. But to survive in the machinery of 1930s Hollywood, she had to disappear. She became a Goldwyn girl. The studio system in those days didn't want messy, loud, complicated women. They wanted statues. They wanted mannequins. They told her, "Dye your hair blonde. Nobody notices a brunette." So she bleached her hair until the chemicals burned her scalp. They told her, "Walk like a lady. Don't speak unless spoken to. Be decorative." So she stiffened her spine and silenced her voice. She spent 15 years in that golden cage. She played the other woman, the sassy friend, the chorus girl. She was always the bridesmaid, never the bride. She was reliable, she was professional, and she was completely, utterly forgettable. And for a performer, being forgettable is a slow death. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being good enough. It is the loneliness of the almost made it. By 1948, she wasn't starving. She had a contract. She had a car. She had a house in Beverly Hills. But she felt like she was running on a treadmill. She was sweating. She was working. Her heart was pounding. But the scenery never changed. She watched others pass her by, younger, faster, brighter. And then, the ground shifted. Television arrived. It was the new monster in the room, threatening to eat the movie stars alive. RKO Studios looked at their roster of actors. They looked at Lucille. She was pushing 40. She was expensive. She was a relic of a bygone era. They called her into an office that smelled of stale cigar smoke and leather polish. The meeting was short. They didn't yell. They just told her that her services were no longer required. They cut her loose. If you have ever been let go, not because you did something wrong, but because you were deemed obsolete, you know the coldness of that walk to the parking lot. It is the feeling of being discarded like a prop that is no longer needed for the next scene. She went home to a silent house. She looked at the framed photograph of her husband, Desilu. And this is where the wound deepens. Because her career wasn't the only thing fracturing. Her marriage was a bomb waiting to go off. Desi was a Cuban band leader. He was electric, handsome, and full of life. But he was always on the road. They were in love, but it was a desperate, distance-filled love, held together by expensive long-distance phone calls and jealous arguments in the middle of the night. The studio executives had whispered to her for years, "Divorce him, Lucy. He is holding you back. He is too foreign. The American public will not understand a redhead married to a Cuban." So here she stands. No contract, a husband she rarely sees, a 40th birthday approaching like a storm front. Most people, at this point, would look for a soft place to land. They would take a quiet radio gig. They would retire to the countryside to hide their shame. They would accept the fade. But Lucille didn't want safety. In the silence of that unemployed season, she realized something profound. For 20 years, she had been trying to be the actress Hollywood wanted her to be, and it hadn't worked. So, she decided to do something terrifying. She decided to stop acting and start being. CBS had an idea. They had seen the numbers. They knew Lucille was funny on the radio, so they offered her a lifeline. They wanted to move her successful radio show, My Favorite Husband, to television. It was a golden ticket. It was a guaranteed salary. It was a way to stay relevant while the movie studios quietly forgot her name. But Lucille had a condition that wasn't about money, or billing, or the size of her dressing room. She walked into the boardroom, looked at the executives, and said, "I want Desi to play my husband." The room went cold. You can almost hear the uncomfortable shifting in leather chairs. The executives laughed, not the warm laughter of a comedy club, but the dismissive, dry chuckle of men who think they know exactly how the world works. They looked at her over the rims of their glasses and said, "Lucy, be reasonable. Nobody will believe you two are married." Think about the absurdity of that statement. They were married in real life. They had been married for a decade. But the reality of Hollywood didn't match the reality of love. They told her it wasn't relatable. They said she was the all-American girl, and he was too exotic, too foreign, just a bongo player with an accent. They told her it was a mismatch that the audience would reject. They whispered to her, "Keep the radio show. Do the TV show solo. Don't risk your reputation on a sinking ship." Have you ever had someone tell you that your truth was wrong? That the things you love, the people you hold dear, don't fit the mold of success? And in that moment, did you hesitate? Did you think about compromising just to stay safe? This was the defining moment of her life. She could have taken the contract. She could have been the star of a safe, standard sitcom with a generic, recast husband. It would have been easy. It would have secured her pension. But Lucille looked at the contract, and she looked at the empty space in her bed where Desi should have been. She knew that if she took the job without him, the marriage was over. The distance would finally break them. So she did the unthinkable. She pushed the contract back across the table. She said, "No. If CBS wouldn't produce it, they would prove it themselves." They formed a company, Desilu. It sounds iconic now, a titan of industry history. But back then, it was just a desperate gamble made at a kitchen table. They took $5,000 of their own money they couldn't really afford to lose, and they created a vaudeville act. They decided to take the show on the road. And I don't mean the glamorous Hollywood circuit. I mean Omaha, Buffalo, Seattle, the deep, industrial heart of America. Imagine this transition. You are a movie star, or you were. You are used to velvet ropes, lighting directors, and assistants. And now, at 40 years old, you are changing costumes in a drafty theater basement next to a boiler room. You can smell the stale beer and popcorn grease from the concession stand upstairs. You can hear the floorboards creak above you. It was grueling. It was unglamorous. In a way, it was humiliating. The industry gossip reached them even on the road. The whispers said, "Look at poor Lucy. She is washed up. She is touring with her husband like a circus act." But watch her closely in the spotlight. Something was happening in those small towns. On those stages, away from the directors who told her to be ladylike, away from the studios that wanted a mannequin, Lucille found something she had lost. She found the clown. She put a cello between her legs and played it like a saw. She made faces that ruined her beauty but ignited the room. She tripped. She fell. She looked ridiculous. She realized that her failure, her inability to be the perfect glamour girl, was actually her superpower. She wasn't a goddess. She was a mess, and the audience, the exhausted factory workers, the mothers with tired eyes, they didn't just like the mess. They needed it. They saw themselves in her struggle. The laughter wasn't polite. It was distinctive. It was a roar of recognition. The executives at CBS saw the numbers from the tour. They saw the lines wrapping around the block in the freezing rain. They couldn't argue with the noise, so, reluctantly, begrudgingly, they gave the green light. But there is always a but. In 1951, television was broadcast live from New York. That's where the technology lived. If you lived in California, You watched a kinescope, a blurry, low-quality recording of a TV screen. It looked like watching a ghost in a snowstorm. Lucy and Desi lived in Hollywood. They refused to move to New York. They wanted to raise their family in peace. CBS said, "Fine, stay in Hollywood, but the picture quality will be terrible, and nobody will watch a blurry show." This brings us to the second gamble, the one that changed history. Desi Arnaz, the man Hollywood dismissed as just a bongo player, had an idea. He said, "What if we film it? Like a movie? With 3 cameras at once? And we do it in front of a live audience?" Silence. Nobody had ever done this. It was technically impossible. The lighting required was insane. The cost was astronomical. CBS refused to pay for it. They said it was a waste of money. So Lucy and Desi did the math. They took a pay cut, a massive one. They agreed to pay for the extra costs themselves, in exchange for one thing: ownership. They would own the films. At the time, it seemed like they were buying a pile of worthless celluloid. Nobody knew what a rerun was. Why would anyone watch a show twice? They mortgaged their present for a future that didn't exist yet. They bet on their own worth when the entire industry was short-selling their stock. Most people think they succeeded because they were funny. No, they succeeded because they were willing to own the risk. October 15th, 1951. The studio tally light turns from dark to a piercing, glowing red. The words "on air" burn into the screen. Lucille Ball is 40 years old, in an industry that worships the dew of youth. She is stepping onto a soundstage to play a housewife who wants to be a star. It is the most honest role of her life. She isn't hiding the wrinkles around her eyes. She isn't hiding the desperation in her voice. She is amplifying it. She is crying loudly. She is stuffing chocolates in her face until she chokes. She is stomping grapes in a vat until she is blue. She is doing everything a lady is not supposed to do, and America stopped. We often talk about viral moments today, but this was different. This was a national synchronization. Department stores in Chicago began closing early on Monday nights because no one was shopping. Telephone usage dropped across the entire continent between 9 and 9:30 at night. And here is a detail that sounds like a myth, but civil engineers swore it was true. In major cities, the water pressure would drop dramatically during the 3-minute commercial breaks. Why? Because millions of people waited until the commercial to finally go to the bathroom. They refused to miss a second of the woman who was too old to be a star. But the ratings were not the true victory. The true victory was hidden in the cool darkness of the Desilu vault. Remember that gamble? The pay cut? The decision to use expensive film instead of cheap kinescope? That decision saved them. Because they shot on high-quality film, the show didn't fade. It stayed crisp. It stayed alive. While other shows from the 1950s disappeared into the grainy ether of history, I Love Lucy looked brand new. When Lucille and Desi went back to CBS a few years later, the network realized they needed content to fill the daytime slots. They asked to re-air the episodes, and because Lucy and Desi owned the film, they didn't just get paid a salary, they got paid for every single usage. They accidentally invented the rerun. They invented syndication. They became millionaires, not just rich, empires rich. When the marriage eventually ended, and it did, because life is not a sitcom and love is complicated, Lucille didn't fade away. She didn't retreat to the shadows of former glory. She bought out Desi's share of the company. She became the first woman in history to run a major Hollywood studio. She sat in the big chair. The woman who was told she was wasting her time in drama school was now the boss of the men who had rejected her, and she used that power. Star Trek? Mission Impossible? They exist because Lucille Ball said yes when every other male executive said no. She didn't bloom late. She bloomed exactly when she was strong enough to bear the weight of the fruit. If she had succeeded at 20, she would have been just another pretty face in a silent archive. By succeeding at 40, she brought 20 years of pain, rejection, and resilience to the screen. She made us laugh not because she was silly, but because she understood how hard it is to be human. Perhaps you are sitting there now, looking at your own late timeline. Maybe you have a manuscript in a drawer, or a business plan on a napkin, or a love you haven't fought for yet. And you think, I'm too tired. The industry has moved on. I don't have the right look. Lucille Ball taught us that the no is not a wall. The no is simply the sound of the world waiting for you to build your own door. We live in a world that tells us to hide our age, to erase our history. But your history is your material. Your failures are your script. Your waiting room was not empty time, it was rehearsal. So, tonight, if you feel behind, remember the redhead who waited 40 years to find her voice. She didn't change who she was to fit the screen. She changed the screen to fit who she was. If this story gave you a moment of peace, consider subscribing to our channel. Join our community of late bloomers, and let's rewrite the timeline together. Your story matters. Your light matters. And remember, it is never too late to shine.